And we're live. What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining. Okay, what are we? 2.5 weeks in to the US-Iran war? Or it's the US-Israel-Iran war. Does it have a name yet? Oh, yeah, it does. What's that cringe name they chose? Protective... No, Epic Fury? Yeah. Ugh. Anyways, that's besides the point, okay? Who's winning? Who's actually winning the war? We're going to assess this from two angles. Who's winning the PR war and who's winning militarily? We'll start with the military. Who's winning militarily? This is actually, they're both pretty hard to assess. This is hard to assess because it's unclear what goals, what are the US goals here? If you don't know what the goals are, how do you know if they're close to achieving them? Right? So we can only speculate how well the US is doing because we don't really know what their intention is because we haven't gotten a clear answer. If the goal is regime change, I mean, that's seems to be an epic failure. The Iranian government does not seem any closer to losing power than they did on day one. In fact, normally when you have regime change, there's a short window. Right after the initial strikes, we see defections. That's like the sign. Many defections early on, some infighting, none of that. Close to no defections. We're not seeing the symptoms of a collapsed government. And we're even seeing intelligence assessments from both the US and Israel saying regime change seems unlikely. And this was predictable. You know, for my entire adult life, I remember the conversation around Iran. And it was always that regime change will be very hard and you need boots on the ground and long-term occupation. And no one really wanted to do that. Makes sense. So the narrative that achieving regime change through bombing always seemed like it was kind of bullshit, and it seems like that's how it's playing out. Another goal we've heard Trump say, it's to liberate the Iranian people. This is directly connected to regime change. Again, that doesn't seem like what's going to happen. There's no reason to believe that that's what's going to happen unless you're just really, really, really hopeful that that's what happens. But based on what we're seeing on the ground, we shouldn't expect there to be a fundamentally different government when all is said and done. Although you never know. Just this is based on the trend, the trajectory, what we can assess from what's currently going on. If you want to say that the goal is to reduce Iran's military capabilities, degrade their weapon system, halt their nuclear program, or slow down their nuclear program, this is all being done. This is all achievable. But none of this creates a permanent solution, right? If you want to degrade their systems, fine. But we've seen time and time again, enemies get degraded and then they come back stronger. Iran is now battle tested. The US and Israel are both have been battle tested. The idea of aerial bombardments over large territory, like the US and Israel have done this many times over. Iran has had no battle experience with their ballistic missiles and drone warfare to nearly the extent they're currently having. And they have a lot more room to learn and grow because of this than Israel and the US does. So if that's the goal, yeah, I guess that is achievable, but that's like a very short-sighted goal that is almost certainly going to be net negative. So again, and now what we hear that the pro-Israel camp, sorry, the pro-war, the pro-US camp, what they're essentially saying is, yeah, but, and this is just repeating Trump, yeah, we destroyed their Navy, we destroyed their Air Force, we destroyed XYZ. No one ever doubted that that would be destroyed. There was never a serious conversation of if the Iranian Air Force or Navy can do anything to the US. That was never a discussion. Nobody expected that. The expectation was complete air dominance, that the US can destroy their Navy. Like, none of this is surprising. None of this is a victory. This is to be expected. What other goals have been achieved? Again, the leadership Yeah, you took out Khomeini, you replaced him with Khomeini. Great, good job. You killed an 86-year-old. Whoop-de-doo. What a what a heroic act. Um, so again, if you want to look at like the tactical victories over their military, sure. If you want to look at anything long term that's been achieved that is going to be good for the U.S. or Israel, I don't think there's a strong case to be made. Iran can claim they are winning militarily because they have still the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Their regime is still in power. They are still able to hit Gulf countries as well as Israel, as well as U.S. military bases with drones and missiles. Even though their capacity to shoot these missiles has been reduced, they're still able to hit them every single day. In this regard, they are winning. What will happen? It doesn't seem like the U.S. has, or Israel for that matter, has such an appetite for this to extend for a long period of time. The global economy is taking a blow. It's only going to get worse. A lot of the current oil prices are artificial. It's based on Trump's commentary and releasing reserve oils, removing sanctions off Russia, so Russia could sell more oil. That's another interesting thing worth noting. That currently the clearest winner is Russia out of everybody. They're bringing in something like 150 billion. Somebody please fact check this. I believe it was a week because of this new oil revenue. But if the Strait does not open up, and also there's the what is it the Red Sea Strait, whatever that's called, the Suez Canal. Is that what it is? Yeah. Or there's the canal, but I don't know the name of the strait. But there's like a second exit point that a lot of world trade comes from. The Houthis do have capacity to close that. They haven't even begun. Like the Houthis haven't even gotten involved yet. So my guess is that the U.S. is going to look for some kind of an off-ramp. It will require just bullshitting the people, say, we destroyed them, we won, yeehaw, just that American chauvinism, just that like, we're the best, we did it, we destroyed them, and then some amount of Trump's base will believe it and buy it. But there's not going to be any like real decisive military victory from the U.S. And I think this is also how the world is starting to see it. So maybe from there, let's just shift to who's winning the PR war, because I think this is a even more clear-cut situation that Iran is winning. Someone's asking, J Masters is saying they had quite a bit of experience in the Iran-Iraq war, but that was a while ago. Yeah, but that was very different weaponry, very different in nature. Like that's not the experience that they're getting now. And then J Master saying, still to hear how any of this is supposedly harming China. Yeah, the whole China thing, there's like a narrative being pushed by supporters of Israel who aren't like blatant Hezbollistas. They're not saying it's very coordinated. You'll notice the accounts talking about this. It's all people who like support Israel, but they're not like blatantly super pro-Israel. They're all putting out these analyses and articles. The real reason why Trump started the war was China, and they're speculating on some China angle. And it's very obvious where this is coming from. These are people who never talk about China, ever. But now it's relevant because they see how the masses believe that the U.S. joined this war because of Israel. It's very bad for public sentiment about Israel and about Jews in public. It's a disaster for Israeli PR. So you don't get defensive. Don't say, no, it's not because of Israel. Just try to push this other narrative. It's China, it's China, it's China. I haven't heard any compelling narrative. It's all just like mental gymnastics, something about controlling energy. In fact, I would say that's a worse justification. If you genuinely believe Iran's building nuclear weapons, that is a better reason to try to defeat them than their relationship with China. I mean, that's even less defensible. But let's talk about the PR war, and I'll tell you why Iran is doing so well in the PR war. And part of it, we need to deprogram a lot of Western narratives around our enemies. This is something I've been going through the process of. But we always hear, if you grow up in the West, the things you're going to hear about adversaries of the West is always going to be highly propagandized and exaggerated. I'll give you an example. If the UAE was not an ally of the West, we wouldn't hear the UAE described the way they're described now, as this strong economy, a place good for business, somewhat progressive, super pragmatic, technologically advanced. That's not what we'd be hearing. We'd be hearing about the fact that Dubai was built by slaves and there's still slavery there, the human rights violations, meaning the lack of freedom their people have, the fact that they're funding proxies in Sudan that are engaging in genocide or genocidal massacres. If you take all the worst stuff about the UAE, you could make them seem as bad, if not worse, than Iran. But they're our allies, so we're only going to hear the good. Iran, it's the opposite. You're only going to hear the absolute worst stuff, every bad thing they've done, and exaggerated. This doesn't mean I'm a proponent of oppressive theocratic system. I mean, anybody who's watched my content knows that's not the kind of government I would support, endorse, or wish upon anybody to live under. But I also think we just need to be honest in understanding different nations, different governments, how they actually function, how they actually see things. So I think we actually need to go back to better understand Iran. I'll do a quick history, but the first part of history is 1953, when there was the coup done by the Shah, which was led by the CIA and the MI6, the British version of the CIA. This isn't conspiracy. This is well documented. The democratically elected leader of Iran was a guy by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He wanted to nationalize the oil, make it a commodity of the people. The CIA or US and UK didn't like this. They worked with the Shah for a coup. The Shah ruled with an iron fist. It was a brutal authoritarian regime, not so different from today. It was just secular and not Muslim, right? And it was an ally of the West and not an adversary of the West. But it wasn't some liberal democracy they were living under, the Shah. And then you had the Iranian Revolution in 78, 79. And it's important to understand that this revolution, one of its key features was anti-Western imperialism. It's in its nature anti-Western. They wanted to take their country back from the West. And they succeeded. Now, understanding the anti-West nature of the Iranian regime, and another thing, I call it Iranian regime because technically it's a regime, but notice the word regime is reserved for adversaries. You'll never hear the Emirati regime, the Jordanian regime, the Egyptian regime. These are all regimes as well, right? So I'm even playing into Western language framing by calling them regime. It's true they're a regime, but we only use this for our enemies, not for our allies. Pay attention. And why is it important to understand the inherent anti-Western nature of this regime? A, it helps us understand why the US still hates them. And it helps us understand a lot of their actions, right? So one of the false notions we always hear about Iran is that they're jihadi, that they have this goal to dominate the world and spread Islam. Not true. In fact, most people don't know Shia Muslims are not allowed to engage in jihad until one of their prophets return. They have not engaged in any terror attacks in Europe. And there's not a single example of a terror attack killing an American on US soil done by a Shia Muslim. Just so people understand. But Muslims, Sunni, Shia, like people don't know, they're all in the same bucket. They're the difference between ISIS and Iran, like all good, all the same shit, right? That's like the ignorant Western view of the Middle East. They're not jihadi. their Islamic nature is much more felt internally with the theocratic nature of their system and how they have laws that are actual state policy that come from the Quran, right? That's how their Islam is experienced by the people. But what they're doing around the Middle East is not best explained as jihadism. It's best explained as anti-imperialism. Now, some would argue that this is their own form of imperialism, which I think there's an argument there. But when they're funding, who are they funding? When they fund Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, it's interesting that all start with the Ha. Although in Arabic, I think they'd be pronounced differently, but in English, they all start with an H. What do they all have in common? All these, as we like to call them, terror organizations / resistance groups, they are all fundamentally anti-Western imperialism. So Iran, which is a minority in the Middle East, being one of the only Shia nations, is looking for allies by supporting weaker entities, but they're also funding anybody who is engaging in Western and anti-Western imperialism. These attacks do not extend into Europe or the US. It is simply to get US presence out of the Middle East. Now, why am I giving all this context? Because people are starting to see Iran not as this brutal Islamic regime, but as simply this anti-imperialist regime that against all odds is fighting the US and Israel and doing well. They view the US as this empire that has a long history of human rights abuses, toppling governments, creating chaos, failing at regime change, engaging just with the level of arrogance and dishonesty against Iran, who has not attacked another nation in decades until they got attacked. So you see how the masses are seeing this? The one is the empire, and the other is just this nation that is, for the most part, keeping themselves, trying to fight Western imperialism. This is how the masses are starting to look at the narrative, not, oh, that's a brutal theocratic dictatorship and the virtuous United States of America is coming in to liberate the people. People don't buy that because that's not what it's about, right? So the narrative that the US has been pushing, people are waking up to. Again, this is not defending Iran against whatever human rights abuses they have engaged in. And I wish the Iranian people better government than their current government. That goes without saying. But people are way more forgiving of someone's bad actions when they see them ultimately fighting for the greater good, and they see this as the only one currently taking on the empire. That's how the narrative's playing out. That's what the masses are being convinced of, and for very good reason. To build on that, who are the faces of both these both sides? On one, you have Netanyahu, Trump, and Hegseth. Like, okay, those three guys. Now, there's some people who find them to be compelling, but that's like a certain type of individual that is like easily convinced by like the strong man, the tough guy, or just for whatever appeal Trump has that for some reason enough Americans think there's something legitimate to his energy, personality, temperament, values. So there are people who see Hegseth and Trump and Netanyahu and be like, yeah, those are strong people. But the masses don't see them as good people. They don't portray we're the good guys. They just don't. Not even close. And then on the other side, you have, how do you pronounce his name? Aragchi, and hold on. And what's the other guy name? The guy who's running right now. Hold on, I want to pull up a video. Did you guys see them walking the streets the other day? I should have prepared this ahead of time. Okay, so there's just two characters in particular I want to mention. One of them, I just don't want to mispronounce their names. Abbas Araghchi. Somebody tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Abbas Araghchi is their foreign minister. And then you have Ali Larijani, who is essentially the leader of the country now. That's what they're saying, de facto leader. They are, in their interviews, in their presence, as the youth would say, they are mogging Trump and Hegseth. They are more likable, they're more charismatic, and they're seen like these good guys just trying to protect their country. Again, that's how it's being portrayed. You can make the case that they're all bad people, that Araghchi's a horrible person. I haven't even looked into his history. I'm simply talking about perception, how he's perceived against the empire of Hegseth and Trump and Netanyahu, the three very unlikable people against these seemingly likable, regular Iranians. Like that's how it's being perceived, right? And let me just show you this video. As Hegseth made a speech saying Iranian leadership is hiding underground like the rats that they are, an hour later we start seeing all these videos of Iranian leadership just walking in broad daylight. And I'm not even going to put audio on. Just literally just look at his face and mannerisms. Well, hold on. Everything from his smile, his calm demeanor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. امروز خب روز قدس هست در ایران و علیرغم حملات و
Right, once calling him using some of the most cringe language imaginable, saying he's like a rat hiding underground, and here he is all smiley and calm and chilling. So I think that's more or less my analysis on both the PR war and the military side. It's not going well for the US or Israel. It's certainly not going well for the people of Iran either. But in terms of public opinion, it seems like Iran is certainly winning. And in terms of military achievements, I think there's a very strong case that they're winning as well. With that, we'll open it up to comments, questions, and whatever else people want. You could also come on and share a different perspective. Also, did you all see Araghchi? He had like his badass comment the other day. Where is it? I think I saved it. Oh yeah, and we already see like Gen Z is already like what's for sure, regardless of how this all wraps up, regardless of if Araghchi and why do I keep forgetting the other guy's name? Araghchi and Larijani, they might not survive the war. They might not. They're going to become anti-imperialist cultural icons. You could already see it. You could already see it. I don't know if you all saw this video, but this is part of what put Araghchi on the map amongst the Zoomers.
Are you afraid of a U.S. invasion in your country?
No, we are waiting for them.
You see, it's become memed. That's where we're at. Anyways, we'll do some questions. See, there's a lot going on in chat. We'll read some comments, etc. Emperor Ghidorah, good to see you here. Do you think there are any intentions or goals by the U.S. that might justify this war in some capacity? I mean, yeah. I mean, if you wanna just say, like from the American chauvinism perspective, like the U.S. needs to dominate the world, and anybody who's not in the U.S. sphere of influence should be destroyed. If that's your perspective, then you could justify it, right? Like however many you need to kill to have Iran with all their power, all their resources be part of the Western sphere of influence is worth it. I'd say you could make a legitimate claim for that if you believe that the US needs to do everything in its power to bring everybody into their sphere of influence. So that could be like a legitimate justification they have, regardless of if people agree with it or not. And the other one is, oh yeah, that's another thing that I think a lot of people are waking up to. The whole they're building a nuke. So I spoke to my dad yesterday, and he's an average Israeli, meaning he's been indoctrinated his whole entire life to believe a certain narrative. But he said, yeah, we need to defeat Iran because they're building a nuke in order to nuke Israel. Isn't that obvious? That's and my dad's not an outlier in that opinion. That's what we've been told forever. But the whole narrative that Iran was rushing towards a nuke is also not at all obvious. First of all, we've been hearing this about them for 30 years. It does not take 30 years to build a nuke. Pakistan did it in the 70s in like a few years. Okay, if they were really trying, they would have succeeded. And there's nothing in the US or Israel did in sanctions or sabotage that would have stopped them if they actually were trying. Second, they signed an agreement with Obama, which would allow full inspections of all their nuclear facilities, and all uranium that was enriched past a certain percent would need to be, I don't know the exact term, but essentially unenriched. There's a way you could downgrade the uranium. They agreed to it, and they did not violate that agreement at all. And then Trump came along, destroyed the agreement. Once Trump ended the agreement with them, and then the next year, Israel did some sabotage in one of their facilities. Then they started enriching uranium to 60%, which is still not weapons grade, but it's true 60% is past civilian use. But that was only after they, in good faith, signed a deal, and then it was destroyed, and then their plants got sabotaged, probably by the Mossad, right? Then they started enriching, not to weapons grade, but past civilian grade. Now, you could speculate, okay, maybe then they decided they're going to race towards the nuke, perhaps, or it could have just been used as negotiating leverage. It's like, look, we negotiated in good faith, we got screwed, so let's have more leverage, all this enriched uranium that we'll, in a negotiation, give up on. But I think the big thing that many people are missing, having enriched uranium does not give you a nuke. That's not the hard part. It's the weaponization of it. It's literally a nuclear warhead. We know that Iran was testing such weaponry for a few years up until the invasion of Iraq, and then they ended that. We have zero evidence, and there's immense intel on Iran, both Mossad and CIA. Nobody has shown us confirmation that they're actually working on weaponizing, on creating a nuclear weapon. And you need to test it. Remember when North Korea tested it, we knew. This is very hard to do without people knowing. We have no evidence of them building nuclear weapons. All we know is that they enriched uranium past civilian use after the agreement with them was ended. But again, if you genuinely believe that they're racing towards a nuke and you're an Israeli, you should want the regime to be destroyed, right? Like, that's terrifying. The reason why pretty much the only country where the majority of people support the war is Israel is because they feel it in their core. This is an existential threat. We need to do something about it. Are they right that it's an existential threat? Almost certainly not, but that's how most Israelis see it. And if you do view it that way, then yeah, aggression is very well maybe the best result. I think they're probably more likely to rush towards the nuke now. It's the only true deterrent, they have against another such invasion. Hold on. I'm trying to plug in my computer. Cool. J Master says the UAE and Qatar are practically identical, but a lot of people act like one is aspirational model for the rest of the Middle East and the other is seen incarnate. Oh yeah. Well, that's true too, right? Because Qatar is not so. Qatar is in between. They've been a pretty good mediator. But they're not established in the U.S. sphere of influence the way UAE is. Shadow, I'm gonna do 2 more questions and then we'll bring you on. You want to propose a counter? Sure. Rad just says, been trying to figure out the truth about the conflict, and found Rad had his trust broken towards the West when their democratically elected leader usurped by 1953 by CIA. Yeah, exactly. We mentioned that earlier. What do Israelis think is going on with Bibi? Guys, Bibi's alive. There's no reason to think he's dead. And whatever's going on on Twitter, it is definitely not serving it. If its purpose is to inform the public, which I know Elon Musk has said that's one of its purpose, it is doing a very bad job. Just this past week, Ben Gvir died, Bibi died, Bibi's brother died, Smotrich's son died. None of these people have died, but people are convinced simply because of what's happening online. We just, like, whenever we have some kind of conspiratorial theory, it's just good to like actually break down the hypothesis and see what that would look like. Okay, Netanyahu is dead. So are you saying his family knows about it, but they're keeping it from everybody? So then they're not going to bury him. Jewish law, you need to bury the next day. So you're saying they're breaking Jewish law and he's just sitting in some freezer until they're ready to tell the public. So the family's hiding it. But what about all the people in government who interact with him on a daily basis? Okay, they haven't seen him in a week. So people start talking. What do you think? You're getting the entire an entire democratic system, the entire political system in on it, and they refuse to tell? Why? Why would people keep it a secret? There's no precedent or reason to keep it a secret. So there's no reason to think he's dead. It's much more likely to happen in like a government that's not a democracy with no low freedom of press and a closed system where they just can hide it for some amount of time. But like, there's no reason to think he's dead, or there's no clear hypothesis for how that would even be hidden from the masses. Too many people would need to know about it. People talk. Think about it also how many people in government hate Bibi and would love to announce that he's dead, you know? Like it's so yeah, he's alive. And I guess unfortunately so. How much damage do you think Iran could realistically inflict on Israel? So that's another good question and another area of misinformation. The damage in Israel is not nearly as bad as many people are saying it is. And Israel also doesn't have any way to hide the number of dead. Again, funerals are the next day. You can't have funerals without obituaries, social media obituaries, written obituaries in the media. When people die, it makes waves all over the country. They're buried within 48 hours. You can't hide the dead. And also, any time a building is hit in the public, a video gets uploaded within 24 hours because thousands of people see it. Some people upload videos. And so again, there's been some buildings destroyed, but it's not like you're going to drive around any city in Israel and it's like destruction. Most buildings are well intact. Where we don't have information, and this is where Israel could hide, is the damage done to military bases. And that is Iran's primary target, military infrastructure. So we don't know the extent of damage there. We don't know the extent of damage there. Fafola, you're giving a quote by the IAEA, but that is after Trump ended their deal with them, not before. This was after they were betrayed on multiple occasions. Anyways, Shadow, we're going to bring you on, and then George will bring you on afterwards, or Jorge. All right, Shadow. Welcome.
Hey, so I want to push back on the idea that the nuke is not a necessary and sufficient reason for this war. That doesn't mean that I'm for it. I think it's unconstitutional. I think it's illegal. And I think that it could be waged in a 50 times more just and effective way. But I just wanted to talk about that point. So I'm going to give a brief summary of what I think is going on, and then I want you to tell me what is like the narrative shattering evidence that you think is a better, pushes your world model closer to where it is rather than mine. So Iran's primary motivation is to export the revolution. And very close behind is preservation of the regime. They are highly intelligent, strategic, and they have their own biases where they're not able to precisely calibrate other people's responses to their actions. But beyond that, they're fairly rational. They were actively trying to build a nuke up until 2003, largely because they were afraid that Iraq would build a nuke as well. They had used weapons of mass destruction against Iran. And as soon as the war ended and Iraq fell, they chilled out a lot and they stopped their nuclear program because the alternative cost wasn't high enough. Ever since then, they've basically been trying to build up layers of military capabilities that effectively deter anyone from stopping whatever nuclear program they eventually push for. And as leverage, trying to get as close to breakout to basically maximize their leverage in any sort of deal, right? So they build up a ballistic program, build as many nukes as possible. They fund terror proxies, make them as strong as possible, right? Hezbollah, probably contributes to the murder of hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. Hamas, they're fully supportive of October 7th and funded it. Other proxies around the world, they've tried to murder the President of the United States, basically anyone who's acted against them. You can call this preservation of the regime and deterrence, but very clearly they take very large actions that have negative impact around the world that persuade much more than deter the rest of the world that they're a problem. Right. So if what they wanted was preservation of the regime, they could be exactly like North Korea, right? They could have had a nuclear weapon by now if they wanted, without anyone stopping them, if they did not act in a way that was threatening to the world. So basically, my argument is if they were a crazy nation trying to race for a nuke and were focused on self-preservation, they would have had a nuke by now, and it would not have been a problem for anyone else. Instead, they are acting like someone who primarily wants to export the revolution because they take actions that encourage their own destruction by the stronger entities that they act as a threat towards. That's the first piece of evidence. And then the second piece of evidence is just honestly, this war and their reaction to the negotiation is, I think, the strongest evidence that we have for the fact that they are more interested in building a nuke and using it offensively than the fact that they are just interested in regime preservation, right? So Trump was fairly clear, right? I don't like that you tried to assassinate me. I'm very annoyed by what you've been doing over the last 40 years. I think you're extremely weak right now because your proxies have been destroyed. And I know that we got rid of your air defenses in the 12-day war. I want you to stop building nukes. That's all I care about. If you basically dismantle your regime, so I have confidence that another president after me who has different political incentives won't be deterred by your military, I'm fine. I will walk away. I think a reasonable person can say that if they truly dismantled their regime, not promised not to build a nuke while Trump was in office, which I think that they were very credibly promising, but actually dismantled their capabilities to build a nuke, this war would not have happened. This war has probably a 30% chance of destroying the regime. I think any sane regime that was focused on preservation rather than a weapon for nuclear offensives would have agreed to dismantle their regime. That's basically my evidence.
So,
what is,
yeah. So the one thing that still isn't clear, there's a massive premise that they've been trying to build a nuke, but I'm not convinced of that.
So I'm not claiming that they've made any attempt to build a nuke, right? What I think is going on is they have the intent to build a nuke and use it offensively.
Wait. But then why haven't they?
Because as soon as you build a nuke, before you have a strong enough deterrence, people will destroy you, right? It takes 6 months to a year to build a nuke. They're at any point in time 2 weeks away from enough enriched uranium. But as soon as they go to build a nuke, we will know this and we will nuke them or invade them immediately.
So
They cannot build.
Shadow, I have This narrative doesn't make much sense to me. You're saying they want to build a nuke to use it offensively. Not that there's any evidence of this. That's just a big claim. But the reason they didn't is because if they did, then they'd get attacked.
Correct.
But we have no evidence of them ever trying to build a nuke. And they didn't even enrich weapons-grade uranium until after Trump. Like, why weren't they doing it from the 90s until 2016, 15, or 16 when Trump ended the deal with them? No nuke.
Okay, so
No, not only no nuke, no enriched uranium, no testing, no weapons testing that's related to nukes. Since 2003, we've seen absolutely nothing. We've seen them have a nuclear weapons, a nuclear energy program that they started escalating once we broke a deal with them. Why should we conclude that their intention is to build a nuke and use it offensively? And one more thing, one more thing. They also have a fatwa against nuclear weapons. An actual religious decree against nuclear weapons. They say it's anti-Islamic. You could say that's all bullshit, but it is also worth noticing from a religious perspective, they're against it, or at least claim to be.
Okay, a couple of points. First, from the 90s, do we agree they were actively building a nuke until 2003?
No. I don't accept that. I think they were testing weapon systems that could be used for nukes, but I don't think they were actively building a nuke. And I don't even think that's what U.S. intelligence is saying either. As much as we should be skeptical of what they say.
Okay, this is good. We have a factual disagreement. At a later point in time, we can actually dig into that. To your broader point, one, do they want to build a nuke? And then two, what would you do if that's what your goal was? If your goal is to build a nuke, you would not do this until your other programs, your proxies and your missile program, was large enough and powerful enough to deter someone from invading you who is convinced that you are going to build a nuke in the next year, which is roughly how long it takes. Do we agree with that premise?
No, I don't think that's the rationale they were operating. I don't think in their mind they were saying.
No. We'll get to the intent and everything else later. I just want to pin you on that point first, so we sort of move at the earliest chain of evidence and world observing disagreement.
So what, that their goal is that one day their proxies will be more powerful?
Their proxies will never be more powerful. Their missile program, right? They're building about 100 ballistic missiles per month. And right now they are nowhere near strong enough to deter the outside world if they went to push for a nuke. Also, they're afraid of Trump. They know that the next president will likely be under different political constraints. Their dominant strategy, if they want to build a nuke, is just keep building up more and more ballistic missiles, wait for Trump to get out of the office. He is more pissed than any other president in the history of the universe would be at them because they tried to kill him. And also he's been talking about we need to attack Iran for like the last 30 years, right? Long before he became president, right? Their dominant strategy is to wait until they have one, enough missiles, and two, a different president, if their goal is to build a nuke. We'll talk about if their goal is to build a nuke later, but just can I pin you on that point? The fact that they haven't built a nuke between 2003 and now, and I've basically just tried to stay as close as possible to enriched breakout capacity for leverage, we would observe that whether or not their goal is to build a nuke, it's not evidence against. Do we agree on that?
I mean, I'm not sure. I want to make sure I understand what we're agreeing on, that they were scared that if they build a nuke, Trump would attack.
My claim is it's obvious that if they tried to build a nuke, we would know, and they're not strong enough to deter. Therefore, the fact that they haven't tried to build a nuke between 2003 and now is not evidence against the hypothesis that they want to build a nuke.
No, I think it is evidence. I think it is evidence that they're not trying. I think you could question the strength of the evidence because you can speculate that they're just waiting for a later date. But if you see a government not doing something, that counts for something. Like you can't. Let me give you an example. Let's say if during the 90s, and people would actually disagree with me on this. During the 90s, there was a genuine intention amongst the Israeli populace for, I don't know if this is the best analogy. Let's say there's a period of time where, okay, there are people who think that Israel wants to conquer land for greater Israel, Jordan, part of Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt. They just want to keep going. Every year that goes by and they don't attempt to expand their territories beyond the river and the sea is evidence that they're not attempting that. Like that counts for something. We can't just say, well, the fact that they're not doing it, I just speculate they're waiting till Islamic and Christian ties in Europe hit a boiling point and the world's distracted by that. Okay, you can speculate on that. But the fact that they're not doing it yet is evidence that that's not their intention.
Okay, I understand the sort of direction of the way you're thinking about it. I actually think that argument is really weak because I think Israel is similarly extremely competent, and any opportunities for expansion we just have not observed. The only time that they can expand is when they react defensively, but that's not the most important point. Sorry, I think I can box you in from the other direction in a much more effective way. Right. So let's take a look at the size of Iran's nuclear program, right? They're enriching to 60% uranium, which is 99% of the way to weapons grade uranium, right? These things are deeply nonlinear. The step from 1% to 3% is many times larger than the step from 60 to 90%. We know that the closer they are to enriched uranium, the better a deal they can get in any sort of negotiation, right? So their dominant strategy is to get as close as possible to getting a nuke without actually building a nuke to extract leverage. The enriched uranium, they could be at 100%, right? The only thing we know is they haven't built a weapon. They're about a week away. At any point in time, they can get to weapons grade enriched uranium. That's the first observation. Yeah. The second observation is they are clearly lying about what the intent of the program is, right? They're claiming that it's for civilian use. They're claiming that it's for medical use. They have enriched past medical grade. They have never done anything medicinal with it. They haven't done any research. They haven't done any of the things that you would do if they were actually trying to develop medical research. They claim that it's for...
Wait, Shadow, I actually recall reading that they have done medical research, so I'm just going to fact check this. You might be right, but I actually recall that that they've done, so I'm just going to look, but I'm listening.
Yeah. They claim that it's for domestic energy production. They have functionally done minimal energy generation with nuclear reactors, right? They have the exact size, right? You either have a tiny program for research or you have a massive program for energy uses. They have a medium-sized program, right? Their program is exactly the size you would need for a weapons program. Now, the logical explanation of everything they're doing is that they're just trying to get as close as possible to breakout capacity to extract as much leverage as possible, or they are trying to get as close as possible to not the point where they have enough deterrence that they will avoid people from invading them, so they are building up their deterrence and then lagging their enrichment as close as possible behind that to reduce the breakout window, because that maximizes their leverage. I'm saying what we are seeing in terms of their nuclear program is exactly what we would predict to see, whether or not their goal was maximize leverage and minimize breakout time to maximize leverage, or build up deterrence to, as soon as you have enough deterrence, reduce the amount of time to build a nuclear weapon and use it offensively. I'm saying that we have a huge amount of evidence that collapses our worldviews into those two hypotheses, and we can't tell them apart based on looking at their nuclear program. We need to look to other things like their behavior, their stated intent, and what choices do they make when they are threatened with regime destruction, when they are willing to accept a high chance of regime destruction to preserve their nuclear program. That's my argument. And I'm saying all of the other things that you're saying are evidence, but they're very weak Bayesian suggestions that are overwhelmed by the other factors. That's my claim. And then I want to actually talk about the evidence of intent. And
I just so when I look at them ending their weapons program in 2003, and we have no evidence that they picked it up again. And then when I see them agreeing to the
I'm
Jacopa,
not claiming they do. I think we have strong evidence they haven't touched it since 2000.
yeah, okay. So, this is what I'm looking at. What you said just seems to be highly speculative at trying to understand their exact intention and strategy, which I think there's some relevance to that. But let's just first understand the facts. That no evidence that since 2003 they've tried to create any type of nuclear weapon, not study it, not test it. We don't have any evidence of them doing this. We know that they were enriching uranium up to 20%, which has medical use, and we do. I just want to tell you, and I could send you a link, but quick Google search. Yes, Iran has enriched uranium in activity as it describes as medical research, specifically producing molybdenum 99, which decays into whatever, that doesn't matter. For medical imaging at Tehran Research Reactor, Iran has converted small amounts of its 60 enriched uranium stockpile into material for cancer detection and used 20%. So they're saying they have done medical use, but I don't even think that's the most important point. When they signed the Jacopa agreement with Obama, they enriched some amount to 20%, none beyond it. They agreed to let IAEA do full inspections of all their facilities and to even de-enrich some of their 20% uranium down to energy grade. They did not violate that agreement once, according to the IAEA. Trump ended the agreement. Israel attacked one of their reactors, and then they said, fuck you guys, we're enriching to 60%. Right now, when Trump again was negotiating with them, they agreed to de-enrich their 60% and let IAEA check. Nothing about the way they've acted the past 2 decades tells me they want to build a nuke and use it offensively. Like, I don't see how we could reach that conclusion based on everything we've seen them done up until this point.
Yes, I fully agree with all of the facts you've stipulated. And I agree that none of what they've done with their nuclear program has any evidence to indicate that they want to build a nuke and use it offensively. Can we proceed with the conversation?
Yep. So we're on the same page there.
Perfect. Okay. So let's look at what they've said, what their theological intent is, and then let's look at what choices do they make when presented with trade-offs between regime survival and nuclear capabilities. So first, their intent. One, do we agree that they take their religion extremely seriously? So for example, if they have a female prisoner slated for execution, they will rape her so she doesn't go to heaven.
What? Wait, I'm trying to understand the relevance of that.
I claim that the reason, I will get to this, I claim that their reason for using a nuke offensively is religiously motivated doctrine. It is how they will arrive at end times, reveal the final prophet, etc. Now, it's possible they're just saying it, so before we get to the specific thing, I just want to establish that they take their religion extremely seriously. They do very weird, very immoral things that if they didn't really believe all of their theological preachings, they would not be doing. The most extreme example of this is raping female prisoners before executing them so they don't go to prison, don't go to heaven.
And do we know that this is actually done, or is...
Yes, this was actively preached by the first supreme leader, and this was done. If you dispute the facts, we can come back.
No, okay, I'm happy to look into it. I just know I often hear things in the Western narrative, then I then look into it and it didn't quite happen. Just one more thing, which I'm happy for us to look into more. Even the assassination attempt on Trump, I'm not convinced that that's a real thing, but we can talk about that more afterwards.
Okay, yes, I claim there were multiple assassination attempts on Trump, Mike Pompeo, other people, and this wasn't done for crazy reasons. This was purely and exclusively revenge against the assassination of, I forget what his name was, but you know.
Yeah, so Soleimani.
General. Soleimani, yeah.
Okay, but that point, it point's less relevant. I just want to tell you I'm skeptical about claims until I look into them. So, but I'm with you. So rape prisoners before they get executed in order for them to not go to heaven. That was a policy of theirs. Okay.
Theologically, do we agree that their understanding is that to usher in the end times, they need to effectively have military victory to prove that their version of Islam is correct, because God basically grants favor to the people. He grants military success to the people with the accurate interpretation of Islam. And specifically, Israel, the destruction of Israel is the thing that is going to usher in the end times through the reveal of the final prophet. Can we agree that that has been, explicitly the religious theology taught by the supreme leader?
I would need to see that that's an actual central part of how they're operating. I'm not saying no, but do you have you have a source you could send me that they're operating under the idea, like a central part of their foreign policy is connected to ushering in the end of times?
No, not a formalized central policy, just a thing that was taught by the supreme leader, right? Not in any formalized sense.
Which the original Khomeini?
This was a major part of their, this was a major part of the eschatology.
Okay, but you need to for a supreme leader to say something is not the same that working its way down to every level of the institutions and having it actually be an active national policy, right? Especially religious leaders. I could find you the chief rabbinate of Israel, and obviously the chief rabbinate of Israel is not an authority figure to nearly the same extent as the Ayatollah is, but religious people say a lot of stupid shit, and that's not the same as attributing it to an actual state policy. We need to be careful of making that jump.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Okay. Cool. I'm with you.
So, right, great. So that's establishing the broad intent, right? Just to explain a premise of what is even the thing that would explain why they would prefer exporting the revolution, and in particular destroying Israel, and then secondarily the US. Why that would even be a hypothesis for what their intent is. Now let's sort of look at the evidence. Can you sort of walk through their actions in Syria and their support of proxies? And the biggest evidence, I think, for the fact that they really were trying to build a nuke and then use it offensively is exactly this war. The fact that they chose to prefer war over dismantling the nuclear program. So that's 70% of the evidence for me, because that's how we actually test it. But before we get there, can you walk through the imperial actions that they've done and explain to me which of those do you think that was knowably going to trigger a response that would threaten regime survival versus normal imperialism, build up deterrence through layered proxies and missile defense?
Yeah, sure. I just want to read one comment from Bechamel Ostrich, because it's probably worth knowing. And again, we should double check all of this. But someone is saying that he's saying that you're projecting Messianic Jewish eschatology onto Shia Islam. Shia Islamic eschatology is not brought about by human actions. So it's worth, if what he's saying is true, then we need to completely discount the fact that one of their intentions is to bring about the Messiah through actions, if Shias don't even believe that that's a thing, right? So maybe jot that down and we could look into it afterwards.
Quick clarification. So he's saying that you can believe that the destruction of Israel will bring about the end times and that this is a good thing. But if you believe that human actions theologically do not interact with prophecy, then that masks out any possible motivation to bring about the end times. Is that correct? Which is reasonable. It's a coherent thought. I just want to make sure that's the structure of the argument.
Yeah, I don't know. We could try to bring him on. Bechamel, if you want to hop on the stream and answer some questions about Shia Islam, you're welcome to. Or if we have somebody else here, another Shia here, you're welcome to join. But we'll put that aside for now. So when we look at their funding of proxies, it's either funding their proxies or their allies. Okay, so they were born when when the regime was born, right after the Iranian Revolution, if they look around the Middle East, they saw a Palestinian people under occupation, right? Their fellow Muslims who are being oppressed by what many view as an extension of Western imperialism. It's not hard to see how they're not going to, like, everything anti-Western about them will not allow them to in any way be okay with Israel. So who's fighting Israel? Who's not an ally of the U.S., who Iran could build ties with? The natural allies then become Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, as of recently, but also Assad, right?
Wait, pause. What do you mean the natural allies become Hezbollah? Hezbollah is a creation of Iran directly.
No, that's not true. Hezbollah is a creation more so of Israel. Not more so of Israel, but Israel's actions when Israel conquered South Lebanon in the 80s, Hezbollah was created as a result of that to fight Israeli occupation. And then their natural ally.
Wait. Pause. The thing that you just said, let's have like let me put together a presentation for you and discuss this. My claim is Hezbollah is a direct creation of Iran. Not as like a weird side effect, hey, we'll provide resources and create a demand function, but that they're like explicitly were created by
Iran. Okay, you want to make the case? Like,
no, I need to put together research. I'm just trying to point that there's like a massive divergence in our understanding.
All right, I'll tell you just the quick ChatGPT answer. Again, there's some hallucinations, but this is connected to what I think is the commonly accepted narrative on this. Iran didn't literally invent Hezbollah from scratch, but it played a key role in creating and building it. After 1982, after Israel invaded Lebanon, several Lebanese Shia militant groups began forming resistance organizations. Iran stepped in quickly. So they took a grassroots movement and they funded it. That's kind of like saying that Israel wasn't created by Zionists, it was created by England. Yeah, I guess, but like you can't discount the grassroots movement that made this possible. This was a legitimate, Hezbollah was created as a legitimate anti-colonial organization that Iran saw kinship with. They supported their ideology, so they funded them. I don't think that's like a radical, like there's nothing irrational or hard to understand about that. That they were a very natural ally. Same with Hamas and the Houthis, and Assad was their ally. So when they saw a popular uprising of Sunni extremists also supported and funded by the West, why would Iran be okay with that? So they did everything in their power to keep Assad in power.
Sure. Agreed with everything you said. The inputs for it are people in Lebanon that are willing to join Hezbollah. All of that is entirely organic. When I say that it was created, what I mean is that they sent a ton of operatives to put together the infrastructure, right? The administrative infrastructure, and then all of the funding. And what they're doing with it is they're not just giving them money and say, hey, our goals are aligned, do what you will. They effectively have more or less complete control over their actions and the things that they ask Hezbollah to do, right? 90% of Hezbollah's military actions were in support of Assad, not in support of destroying Israel, right? This isn't like what's happening with the Houthis or what's happening with Hamas, where they're just sending them a ton of money when they're allied and then not doing it when they're not allied, right? Like I'm saying that Hezbollah is basically acting as a proxy of Iran, not as like they're completely different from Hamas and from the Houthis in terms of what the relationship is. That's my claim.
Okay. I mean, I haven't seen anything to suggest that Hezbollah does not operate like on their own to some degree. I know it's even contested now. There was the embassy bombing in 92 and the Jewish Center bombing in 94. And, the anti-Iran narrative was, Iran commanded this, but that was never even demonstrated. Nor have Iran shown any interest in doing attacks outside of the Middle East as far as we can tell. But I don't even know how we parse this out and understand to what extent they control Hezbollah. What I will say is,
do we agree that 90% of the people killed by Hezbollah were in Syria, and that they would have nothing to do with Syria if Iran was not involved?
No, again, let's say Iran was not involved and Assad said, "Hey, we would appreciate support. He's an Alawite, which is a form of Shia. They were supportive of one another. I don't know why that alliance can't happen without Iran being involved. Why would Hezbollah want like Sunni jihadis to take over Syria when they could have a Shia ally there? But again, you might be right. I'm just not. I'm just not.
Hezbollah's entire claimed raison d'etre is to protect the Shiite communities of Lebanon, who are mistreated by the state, who are completely abandoned, who are not offered any utilities, any rule of law, anything, right? Their entire thing is, we will actually build a state because the actual state does not exist. The actual state is a complete failed state. We would assign a close to 0% probability that a organization with that type of motivation would project external power at all. I think that any reasonable interpretation of what they're doing is explicitly, they're a proxy of Iran. They're doing what Iran tells them to do. Like they resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands, horrible war crimes, possibly hundreds of thousands, just because Iran wanted to project power into Syria. I think the plausibility that they would do that on their own, I think, is close to zero.
So again, if you were to ask me, do I think Iran had something to do with Hezbollah being involved in Syria, I would say yes. But if you ask me, had Iran not been involved, would Hezbollah then also not be involved? And to that, I'm just unsure because they had a natural alliance beyond just Iran.
Okay, this is a great point of potentially resolvable disagreement. Maybe I'll put together a presentation. I claim that the fact that they were involved is like a 300-to-1 ratio evidence in favor of them being an Iranian proxy, and that's totally not something they'd have done on their own. So this is like very good for us to identify crux. I agree that if that's your approach, then everything I said has very little value. Let's move on just to the last point of, does the fact that they would prefer this war happen then dismantle completely their nuclear program? Let's talk about if that means anything. So first, just the premise. Do you agree that if they told Trump, we will dismantle our nuclear enrichment capacity and ship out our enriched uranium, the 400 kilograms, but we're not going to do anything with our missiles? And I don't know if they would have had to do anything with the proxies. I think the proxies are dismantleable already. So let's say all they offered was their nuclear program. Do we agree that Trump would have almost certainly accepted that, taken that as a win, and there would be no war? This is a very contested hypothesis. Do you agree with it?
I'm not sure. It's possible that it would have been enough for Trump. It wouldn't have been enough for the West to be okay with Iran's existence as a state that's not in their sphere of influence.
I agree with that, but would it have collapsed the desire, the motivation for war far below the cost of doing it?
I'm not sure, because if we look at the narratives around this war, I mean, in Israel, amongst Israelis, yeah, because that was our major threat. But if you look at the narratives online, it was, oh, they're killing tens of thousands of their own people. Oh, we've been at war with them for 47 years. It's all these narratives that are not connected just to nuclear weapons. It's just the fact that they've been attacking us for 47 years. They're oppressive towards their own people. You could see how you can manufacture consent for regime change for a multitude of different reasons. So if the nuclear equation is off the table, I don't think they would have just been accepted as, okay, yeah, Iran's good now. I think they would still look for reasons. The same way, every single country that is not in the U.S. sphere of influence, who has resources, and even if they don't, is made out to be a demon.
I agree you can always have propaganda and manufacture consent for anything. We live in a highly propagandized society. But I'm saying the actors that would decide to do it, right, what is their motivation? Their motivation is largely driven by the fact that they think they're going to build a nuke.
Oh, no. So
And if
that,
they
so
were
I don't think
not
so,
to-
Shadow. I don't think so. I think the motivation is not because of that. I think they want Iran in the U.S. sphere of influence. They want better deals on the oil. I don't think Trump. It's hard for me to put myself in Trump's mind. I don't think he even knows what he's doing, but I don't think those pushing for regime change. That's what it was about. It was about Iran being part of the West and not the East.
I see. If that's what you believe, then all of this is kind of okay. I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. My assumption is it was very predictable that this war would not happen while their missile program was healthy, while they had air defenses, while they had proxies. As soon as their air defenses and proxies were dismantled, the cost of going to war dropped by about 70% from completely unjustifiable and possibly only justifiable if they were a couple of weeks away from actually building a nuke to Iran is very weak, we can go to war with them. If what you're saying is this is just about spheres of influence, then I agree that the cost of going to war has dropped below that threshold. So I agree with that.
Okay.
Okay, so we would go to war. Okay, fine. I agree that I see. Okay, so do you think Iran models it that way? Because my claim is that Iran doesn't model it that way. They know they're trying to build a nuke. They know that the West knows they're trying to build a nuke. And as soon as the cost of stopping them drops below the motivation of stopping them, if they're building a nuke, that's when war happens. If instead we live in a world where they're not trying to build a nuke and they think the West just wants them under spheres of influence, then the threat of going to war if you don't dismantle your nukes is just a smokescreen. And then the fact that they prefer to go to war tells us absolutely nothing. So if that's your world model, then I actually don't have any evidence to offer you.
Okay.
So I just agree that that's the case.
Right. So I'm still happy to explore your line of reasoning if I were to accept that premise, but I want to explain further why I don't. I don't think Iran. I don't think Iran, in their mind, we want to build a nuke, and the U.S. wants to attack us because we want to build a nuke. I think that they are deeply convinced that it has to do with sphere of influence. If Iran doesn't bow to the U.S., the U.S. will constantly be looking for reasons to fight them. This is supported by the fact that the U.S. supported a coup against their democratically elected leader because they wanted to nationalize oil, and that they have just found every reason to be against them ever since they've been in power. Before any nuclear weapons program was even discussed, they were sanctioned. Actually, I don't know when the sanctions went in effect. They were always seen as an enemy of the West, as somebody who the West has no influence or control over. This is a fundamental part of how they view things, regardless of nuclear weapons or not, which is also why I think that they're not likely to give up on their nuclear energy program for two reasons. One, they're not convinced it'll solve the problem. Two, they're fundamentally anti-imperialist. They're not going to bow to the U.S. They're not going to not have nuclear energy because the U.S. doesn't want them to. That's against who they are as a nation. To me, that's what's driving them. Not they want to build a nuke and the U.S. knows this, so they're going to attack us. I really don't think that's how they're operating or what they're trying to do.
Okay, in that case, I think I'll drop off because I don't think that this would be a productive conversation. Let's let someone else speak, because you've persuaded me that, again, I already agree with you that in terms of what they've done with the nuclear program, that is indistinguishable between they want to be as close as possible to break out capacity for leverage, and they want to be as close as possible to break out capacity because they don't yet build and have enough missiles, enough proxies to actually deter an invasion if they actually went for a nuke, which is my understanding. And in terms of what you said about whether or not they agreed to go to war, if you're saying that they expected the US to topple them if they're weak enough, and it has nothing to do with their nuclear program, which I think is 80% at least of the actual geopolitical motivation, just because of how expensive war is, I don't think it makes any sense to invade Iran if not for the nuclear question for anyone involved. But if you're saying that's not the way that they're thinking about it, just if that's their belief, then the fact that they would prefer to go to war than risk regime change rather than dismantling their nuclear program, which they don't expect would prevent war, then that fully masks out the second half of observation. So I actually have nothing that I can say to persuade you, given what we've already agreed we disagree on. So let me just go away and do my own research about two things. One, whether or not Hezbollah is a proxy. My claim is basically they're indistinguishable from a proxy, and Iran is asking them to do things that trigger other nations to want to regime collapse them because they're annoying. That's the first premise. And the second premise is the religious theological eschatology motivation of, does Iran have actually a reason to nuke Israel to trigger the end times? Those are probably the 2 points that we need to resolve to get anywhere, given that, given your world model, all of the evidence that I find persuasive actually has no bearing whatsoever on your world model. So just with that as a summary, I'll drop off and let anyone else speak about whatever they want.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much, Shadow. I think we had a great discussion, and hopefully we've set a good example of how two people could disagree and still navigate the conversation respectfully and find some common ground. Shadow, I'm going to throw a few more data points just to strengthen my the idea of how the U.S. views regime change and how it's almost never really connected to weapons of mass destruction. I mean, in Iraq, we did get that as the false pretense, which ended up being not true. But if you look at the U.S., why was NATO involved in toppling Gaddafi in Libya? Like, what was their reason for that? They were considering doing it in Syria as well, but Russia didn't allow it. Why Syria? There wasn't for nuclear weapons. Venezuela, what was the issue with Venezuela? What do all these people have in common? They refuse to bow to the U.S. and be in their sphere of influence. So if you have resources and you're not on the U.S. sphere of influence, the U.S. is gonna there's gonna be people in the U.S., whether it's lobbyists, the neoconservatives, whoever it may be, are gonna push for regime change or to put some whatever amount of pressure or sanctions on this government to punish them until they bow to the U.S. And I think that's a consistent pattern. I think that best helps us understand U.S. interest in Iran.
I agree with all of that completely. Just before I drop off, to sort of suggest to other people how to think about this. Every time the U.S. goes to war, it's a cost-benefit analysis of a bunch of different things. It's how much do we want to topple the regime? How much do we want to steal their oil? How much do we want to add them to our column versus our geopolitical alternative hegemon? Is it Russia? Is it China, etc.? And then you compare that to how easy it is to sell to your people because you can manufacture some, we're bringing democracy or women's rights or whatever. And then how powerful is the other entity? So I claim that every single one of those actions, I would have agreed with you on the motivation, and I would have also predicted that the war would have happened. Iran is extremely different, right? If you're think about all of the missile interceptors that are going to be drawn down. Think about how expensive it is. Think about how risky it is. Think about how completely unnecessary this is. Think about how in expectation destructive this is to Trump's political motivations. I'm saying that any sort of reasonable cost-benefit analysis, if not for the nuclear program, would very heavily predict that this war would not happen.
Okay.
Now, we know that it would not have happened even with the nuclear program before, with the proxies, with the air defenses. Basically, we would have expected nothing to happen until Israel reduced the cost of going to war by 60%, which they did. But I'm claiming that without the nuclear program, the cost would have needed to be reduced by 90 to 95%. And the fact that we're seeing the war exactly now, rather than, let's say, 3 years from now, is highly indicative that the nuclear program is dispositive. That's my claim. I'll drop off.
Okay. I mean, so I think that's it's an interesting point. What I would like food for thought on that is it just possible that Trump has not done the right cost benefit analysis, whereas others before him did, and that's why he was the first to be convinced to do it. It's not for no reason we've been hearing Iran's a threat, and no U.S. president was even willing to get near any type of military action. Did Trump get access to new intel that said we need to move now, or is he just not as rational as the people who led before him, or is he motivated by other things? I don't think Trump's a particularly rational actor. I think he's very emotional. He's driven by his own legacy, right? So, yeah.
Okay, one more sentence for me, and then I'll drop off.
Sure.
My evidence for that is I'm operating under a worldview where they're going to build a nuke, and if we know that they're just going to keep building up missiles, the moment you invade Iran and destroy their nuclear making capacity is precisely when it is worth the cost-benefit analysis to do this. I'm running this analysis independent of Trump. As soon as Hezbollah is degraded and their missile defenses are annihilated in the 12-day war, based on my analysis, that's the trigger. I'm doing this independently of Trump, right? So it would be a really big coincidence that I, who thinks that the nuclear program is the only reason to attack, would say, okay, now is the time that the war is worth it. It would be a coincidence that when I predict it's worth it is exactly when Trump agrees that it's worth it. If Trump is just this irrational person who has a ton of biases and thinks, oh, it was easy with Venezuela, Iran will be a 2-day operation, haha, I'm God, I will manifest reality through my force of will and charisma. I'm saying that's a big coincidence. I wish that I registered this hypothesis in advance so that this would be useful rather than just some bullshit that I could be saying after the fact. Now we'll really drop off.
Awesome. Thank you, Shadow. Okay, we have a bunch of people waiting to come on. And I need to hop off. So we'll bring a few more people on, but we're going to keep it to 5 minutes a person, okay? And then we'll do another stream in 1 to 2 days. Jorge, you've been waiting, so we're going to bring you on. Jorge, welcome. And then we'll bring on history, and then we'll bring on Tuten Kareem.
Hey, Adar.
Jorge, good to see you.
Thanks for having me here. You guys hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yeah. So, I really want to get to the root of all this. Guys, anti-Semitism is real. I get it, right? The Jews have been blamed for capitalism, for communism, for the Black Plague, and so on. But what is anti-Semitism, right? It's just a set of intellectual errors, right? And how do we overcome intellectual errors? Through reason and logic and sympathy for the misguided, and so on. Just like we overcame slavery, unequal treatment of women, and so on, right? Now, Zionism, right, attempts to overcome anti-Semitism, not through reason and logic and education, but by telling Jews that there is some irrational hatred that we're never going to be able to overcome, and that the way to overcome anti-Semitism is by various ways in which Herzl tried, converting Jews to Christianity. Herzl didn't give a shit about Judaism, and getting Jews to leave the humble synagogues where they really shared a culture with local people, and they had lived for hundreds of years, to coerce themselves a state, right, with a Herzl-designed atheist flag. Ben-Gurion went in 1923 to the Soviet Union to get a glimpse of his hero Trotsky and celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, okay? To have these totally clueless people, okay, coerce a national identity by a bunch of secular guys, to coerce that identity upon a bunch of religious people who were connected to the God of Abraham, who wanted nothing to do with it. That was likely to be an intellectual error, okay? That's all it is, just a mistake. And I think that a lot of times, we're talking and Shadow is talking about this, guys, and what they did and so on. But that is really you're still working in the framework. It's like the communists trying to get a 5-year plan to work. Oh, well, we didn't do it right. We got the saboteurs over here. We didn't have the right guy in power. We can do this. You're trying to nibble without realizing the root fallacy. And the root fallacy is that, again, it's very simple. Zionism was just a mistake. Now, very important, and I won't even take 5 minutes, right? We have to see it as a mistake, just like socialism. Socialism led to a lot of really bright, intelligent people. I know this personally. Again, I was born in Cuba. I was raised by communists, right? My family members were not evil. They were not satanic. They were not, So we have to see Zionism as an intellectual error. Again, the extreme right and Candace Owens calling, the Jews satanic and the Israelis satanic, those anti-Semitic fallacies only grow Zionist power. The extreme left calling the Zionists a bunch of capitalist exploiters and white, colonialist settlers, that too is another fallacy, right? Adar, you've been talking about this. We know that that's not really what happened. The Jews are mostly there because they really were escaping anti-Semitism. We got the Second World War, all the chaos, right? But all the anti-Semitism in the world, doesn't make the current brand of Zionism, as well as the original brand of Zionism, a practical or a moral idea. It's that simple. Again, we overcome anti-Semitism by understanding the fallacies and everything. So the way I see it, anti-Semitism and Zionism are two fallacies that grow from each other. And we need to create a beacon of people who understand these things, and we can somehow lead the rest. We have to fight the anti-Semitic fallacies, and we have to fight the Zionist fallacies. And I'm very happy to make some friends here, and I think we're making progress. So, I mean, that's all I wanted to make. That simple point, And anyway, that's all. Anything you wanna ask me anything or whatever? And I do not think that Shadow is uncivilized or he's evil or whatever. Shadow just has a different way of looking at things, and we just have to focus on the intellectual differences. I met him in person. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I would I'd be happy to explore this idea deeper with you. I mean, I agree to a large extent. There's some things I disagree with, but we just don't have time now. So we heard you. Thank you, and let's find a time in the future to go deeper on this.
Yes.
Awesome. Matthew, we're bringing you on.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so look, I think this is pretty simple, and I think it's sad that it's simple in the sense that I think it's going to play into tropes. I think that there's no interest in the United States in this war at all. If you look at the theology, the theological aspect, it actually points towards wanting the Iranian regime to stay in power as from the American perspective, as a wedge against potential Sunni extremism. I mean, sadly, and I don't say this to vilify Sunnis. Most Muslims I know are Sunnis and so on. So I'm not anti-Sunni, but nevertheless, the problem that faces the West, Europe and the United States in terms of Islam, is extremist Sunnism, is Salafi jihadism. The Shia have a doctrine where they can't even apply the full Islamic corpus, including offensive jihad. They can't apply. They can't establish a caliphate and wage war to spread Islam until the Mahdi comes out of occultation, which is never for our purposes because we don't think it's real, right? So this is cashed out. This isn't just a pedantical theological point. This is cashed out in real world attacks. Shiites, other than since this war started, and there was also the Salman Rushdie case, Shiites commit virtually no terrorism in Europe and the United States. It's just not unlike ISIS attacks or Al Qaeda, like these Salafi jihadist groups, it's just not a real security threat to the United States. So to me, it seems like it's clearly a threat to Israel, but it's not a threat to the United States and Europe. And, the narrative that Trump was manipulated into this by the Israel lobby, to me, strikes me as very persuasive because I just don't see any U.S. interest in this at all, really. I mean, what is the U.S. interest? I guess you could say it's moral, but I don't think we really buy that.
No, yeah. I don't think that's how. First of all, I don't know if you were listening from the beginning, but at the beginning, I actually explained what you said, how Shias are not engaged in jihad, and there's no reason to view them as a jihadi entity. They're anti-imperialist. That's how we should understand their foreign policy. Their internal doctrine, their internal policy can be seen through the lens of Islam, but not their foreign policy. It's not the right framework to understand how they operate in the Middle East. So I agree with you there. What interest? I mean, we can only speculate. It's just so hard to put ourselves in Trump's mind, right? He literally could have been convinced by Netanyahu or Netanyahu and Kushner together. He's very impressionable. He's I think doing this for his legacy more than anything else. So if he could be convinced, imagine this, if he could be convinced that he could do Venezuela 2.0 in Iran, and it would just be tremendously amazing for his legacy, that's enough. He does it like the whole humanitarian, we know that's bullshit. The whole nuclear weapons, whatever being at war with them for 47 years, I don't even think he thinks that deeply on things. If you look at how he's been operating in his second term, it's simply, it's hard to structurally and fundamentally change a political system. Most people don't have the mind for it. Trump definitely has no idea how to do that. But you don't need to be sophisticated to understand Like, let's change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Yeah, that's a win. Let's expand the territory by getting Greenland or Canada. Yeah, that's a win. Think of it, everything he's really trying to do. It's these kind of simple, shallow, doesn't require much thought or complexity, but are good for his legacy. And it seems like that's how he's just operating. So again, I'm speculating on how his mind works, but it seems to be a pattern for pretty much everything he's putting an emphasis on. And this very well just might fall into the same category. He was convinced that it would be easy and that would be great for his legacy. And
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear you at the beginning, but I'm glad you understand that point. But it's just like, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm playing into tropes or anything like that, and I'm not. I'm sincerely not. I'm not just saying this for optics. I'm really not an anti-Semite, but like FDD, for example, has convinced some kind of lower tier people in the Congress that Iran is the big threat to the United States in terms of Islamic terrorism. When again, as we've mentioned, Shi'i terrorism, like Salafi jihadist terrorism is like, the overwhelming majority of religious inspired terrorism. Shi'i is like people who identify as vampires, right? And are motivated by vampirism, have killed about as many people on American soil as people motivated by Shiite Islam have. So it does seem like there's some kind of manipulative discourse.
Is it time to raid Transylvania?
Something this absurd,
I think we need a regime change in Transylvania. That means all those vampires.
Yeah, no, but and that's the problem, because honestly, I think historically these tropes were basically absurdities, right? But Israel, because Israel needs, I think, Western backing to survive, because there's so much hostility to it in the region. It's a small country. It's wealthy per capita, but not like overall, particularly because it's a small country. I think that there's just this kind of toxic industry of sort of like manipulating people, because they need the U.S. buy-in, and there isn't a straightforward way to get it in terms of our interests. So I think that requires manipulation, and then this kind of like the FDD. Like this is a manipulative discourse, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this in turn leads to anti-Semites who say, "Oh, that's just the Jews being manipulative," which I don't buy for a second, right? But it's just the kind of incentive structure this country has gotten, and then paired with the fact that there are a lot of folks who are, powerful and well-connected, who are pro-Israel, that leads to this sort of manipulative discourse. I mean, it's just absurdity, though. I mean, the other absurdity is the moral pretext for this so-called. No, I'm not denying at all, because there's compelling evidence of it, that the Iranian government, at one point in these protests in January, they just started to label them all as terrorists and killed them all. That clearly happened. We have videos, testimonial evidence of unarmed folks being murdered. On the other hand, though, over 200 security forces were killed. So there was not just, no question, again, they systematically killed civilians. No question, the Iranian government. But there was some kind of weird, like, civil war type thing going on, which we're not allowed to talk about. I mean, that's more than the number of security forces killed in, like, than IDF killed in Gaza in the last year. I mean, it's a huge number.
Right. And how did they get the weapons and all that? It's interesting how little attention that got. Yeah.
And imagine you mentioned UAE earlier. Imagine the Emiratis had, imagine over 200 Emirati security forces had been killed. And the Emiratis claimed, this is by a movement that was trying to overthrow the government, right? Because this was a regime change movement, right? And again, I'm with them. I'm with them. That they were in the right, I think, even to violently kill these people, right? They wanted a better life. So I'm not saying they were wrong, but I'm saying that as a moral basis for a war, it's really flimsy. And like a bunch of our buddies would do the same thing. And in fact, suppose UAE had done this and then they had said, these were all extremist Muslims. They were Muslim Brotherhood, which they would have, whether they were or not. I think you would have had the FDD people either supporting it or like nuance-throwing it. I don't think you would have had a clear condemnation, and you would have had nobody saying we're going to go to war because it's such a moral outrage. Mm-hmm. No one would say that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anyways, Matthew, I do want to wrap up the stream, so just final thoughts, and we'll bring on one more person.
Yeah, I'll just go on it. Yeah, but I I think there's a concern with anti-Semitism here too, because to me, this is just like almost a cartoon. Like it's just blatant manipulation of the public for something that isn't in the United States' interest. So I'll just leave it there, but I'd be interested to hear your closing thoughts. I'm going to just drop off about whether that's unfair or that it's more complicated than that. But to me, I'm just shocked by the discourse, to be honest, on this. I find it very manipulative and just basically for Israel. But yeah, I'll drop off. Take care, bro.
Thanks, Matthew. And look, I don't disagree. I mean, when has war narratives been honest? And, of all the past wars, this has been just the most all over the place. Trump's incoherent half the times. He's given us 5 different reasons for the war, and they keep changing. So for sure, there's nothing honest about how this is being communicated to the people. Tut and Kareem. Oh, I see Fafo. So I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but saying that Shias are anti-imperialist is like saying Russians are anti-imperialist. Well, so I mentioned Iran is anti-imperialist in their nature, but you could see that as their own form of imperialism. So I did acknowledge that, but that is the better way to understand them. And no, Shias are not engaged in jihad the way Sunnis are. If you look at all the terror attacks in Europe, in the US, around the world, these aren't Shia terror attacks. As Matthew said, a Shia has never killed somebody in a terror attack on US soil. Vampires have killed more people than Shias. So again, that's just, you're welcome to argue back with something other than this doesn't sound right because my government's been lying to me my whole life, right? And I know I'm not saying that's you, Fafo. I know you're more open and honest than that, but this is simply based on what we know to be true. Okay, Tut and Kareem. I think this is your first time joining, so welcome.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep. Welcome.
Okay, let me start by saying Shalom Uvracha, Ach Sheli, Ani Karim, Ani Mitzrayim. Okay, that's the very brief Hebrew that I know.
Very good Hebrew for an Egyptian.
Wanted to applaud you and the audience for this civilized and educated way of bringing forth a collaborative discussion, especially in these times of uncertainty on war and such. I just wanted to bring forth a couple of points, if I may. I know you got limited time, Adar, and I applaud you for taking this discussion so correctly and stuff. People are starting to call me on WhatsApp now. I'm trying to block everyone, surprisingly. First of all, I think some of the narratives and the points that were brought forth were the perspective of Shia and Sunni Islam about the Messiah and about an end reason for the perspective of the conflict or the situation with Israel, with its allies, with the United States and such. I just wanted to clarify a couple of points here, if I may, before entering to the main point of discussion. The Messiah or the Mahdi Muntazar or the awaited guided caliph, like they call him, is not going to come through war. It's going to come through a consensus of an ummah, of a nation that's guided, and it will eventually evolve. And we don't have clear evidence of saying that a narrative or a reason for saying, okay, the end game of Iran is to bring forth the Messiah. It is a fallacy, really, and a misunderstanding of common Islam, let's say. I consider myself a practicing Muslim. I'm half Egyptian, half Spanish. My mother is Catholic, my father is Muslim. I brought up in a very diverse environment. But I wanted to ask you, Adar, and the audience, is how much of this war or this reason, sorry, the bells are ringing here in Spain for church. Hope it's not bothering you too much. How much of this war, this casus belli, I mentioned this on the comments on YouTube, is a preemptive strike on a potentially nuclear Iran? And how much of it is it sending a clear message of the capacity and thank you QWK for the church bells. How much is it the capacity of Israel of sending a clear message to the rest of the people, or especially armed militias in the region, about saying this is what we can do with people who are opposing our way of politics, of realpolitik in the region. And of course, some mention was given about the Gaddafi case, Libya, Iraq. I think you mentioned this, Adar, and it's quite readily to put that, because at the end, what happened in those scenarios is that we seeing a potential power in the region that is opposing the interests or the vision of the United States of America and its allies. So my question to you, Adar, and obviously to the audience, is how much is this guided by sending a message to any opposing factions in the world, seeing a strong Iran is not favorable to U.S. and Israeli interests, and how much is it for the Greater Israel project? I mean, I think some mention was given to Zionism, to the Greater Israel project. And Adar, I think you're a former IDF soldier. I applaud your courage in taking this stand, you know, to kind of bring forth an educated and civilized manner of dialogue. It takes a lot of initiative and respect, and I highly applaud you for that. I mean, I might disagree on some of the points, but I respectfully disagree on the points, you know? So I brought 2 points, a perspective of the Messiah in Islam, and obviously the Greater Israel Project, or the casus belli, or the reason behind the war, if I may. I'm glad here. I'm going to put myself on mute so I don't disturb any more bells.
Sure. Thanks for hopping on and sharing. I mean, our assumption should be U.S. foreign policy is primarily motivated by increasing their sphere of influence. It's the common denominator of all the military action they've taken probably since World War II. It's never been to help the people of that country. It's never been because those nations posed a direct threat to the U.S. It's that they were not allies of the U.S. and they could benefit if that country gets in their sphere of influence. This is the common denominator against virtually all U.S. military actions since World War II. So that should be our default assumption for why the U.S. is getting involved in something. In addition to that, you could say lobbyists. There's pressure from lobbyists, whether it's, you know, just military industrial complex, all the defense contractors that have an interest in there being continuous war, or if it's the pro-Israel lobby that wants the U.S. to help Israel fight Iran, right? These are certainly going to play into it, but I think that the main one is just U.S. sphere of influence and how do we expand that as much as possible. The Greater Israel Project, I think, I don't even think it's real. First of all, Greater Israel has 2 definitions. I only learned this years ago. I don't know, for those who have been watching the channel for a while, but the most popular video I ever did was moderating a debate between Noam Chomsky and Rudy Roshman. It's like 5 years ago now. And they kept going back and forth about the definition of Greater Israel. They had different definitions, and then I looked it up afterwards. Turns out they're both right. Some people say Greater Israel, and they mean all the land between the river and the sea. Other people, they look at the map of ancient Israel, or what was once supposedly part of the kingdom, which includes parts of Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. So if you mean the Greater Israel Project, meaning all the land between the river and the sea, I mean, Israel's political system, the majority of their population have an intention for all the land to be Israel and remain Israel. That is the most popular position, not only of our government, but the majority of the population support that. If we're talking about Greater Israel beyond the borders, there's no real political movement in Israel to achieve that. The amount of the Israeli public that would actually advocate for it is single-digit percent. The amount of people in government who are advocating for it are close to non-existent. This is one of those conspiracies against Israel that's not really based on anything real. And I think not only is it not based on anything real, it's also a distraction, because you have serious human rights abuses happening between the river and the sea. Gaza is still, there's daily bloodshed in Gaza. We have active daily settler violence in the West Bank, and ethnic cleansing. Palestinians are leaving because their conditions in the West Bank are so bad. This is real. This is happening. We need to put our focus on this. The Greater Israel, like expanding beyond, I don't think there's anything to that.
You don't believe in the narrative that says, well, we say it in Arabic, rough translation is, your land Israel, well, the promised land is between the Euphrates and the Nile.
No, I'm telling you, I know it's a common, like the sooner
it is written in the Knesset. is written in the Knesset. My father went there as part of an intelligence mission. And I wanted to understand, I mean, because you define this logic of there being a greater Israel project, but the politics somehow defeat that argument, because we're seeing the Abrahamic Accords. I understand they're economic in nature, but maybe they're in part due to deter or even subdue certain powers in the region, let's say. And also, we're seeing the movement and how the disarmament of potential opposing factions or opposing politics in the region. We're seeing these armed groups, because at the end, these armed groups, Hezbollah, we're talking about radical Islamic militias and such, they are the only resistance left towards greater Israel project. And that's the kind of, I wanted to lead you into that point, because I mean, I want to understand your perspective. I mean, I have my own, and I probably don't have time to share it in the 5 minutes that you give me.
No, I mean, so I'll just tell you, as you know, somebody who's lived in Israel for more than half my life. I mean, Israelis are not talking about Greater Israel Project. There's no movement amongst Israelis about this. No politicians are talking about it. Smotrich has once mentioned it, but he is very much an outlier. He's such an outlier. Yeah, he's in government because Netanyahu had to make deals with extremists to remain in power, but his party's not even going to be eligible to be in Knesset because of how unpopular Smotrich is. There's really no political will, not amongst the people, not amongst the politicians, to somehow achieve Greater Israel. It's like we need to accept it that it's just a conspiracy not based on anything. If you want to know why Israel was happy about the Abraham Accords, why wouldn't Israel want more allies? Israel is looking to have as many allies as possible. Why wouldn't they want to defeat Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran?
As well, not only allies, but trade partners.
For sure, yeah. I mean, and again, why wouldn't they want to defeat Hezbollah and Hamas? They have a mission to destroy Israel. Israel is obviously operating in their own self-interest and self-preservation, but like the idea that there's some biblical motivation to continuously expanding beyond the Jordan River is not. You really don't need to worry. You don't need to worry about that.
You don't think that war unites Israel? I mean, I've been told when I was learning my very basic Hebrew that there's such differences. There's such differences in the Knesset and inside the Israeli politics that at the end, the only thing that keeps Israel united is war. You think there is a reason that war is proactively being pursued? I mean, we saw this in Gaza. We see this with Lebanon. We see this with Iran now. I mean, don't you think there is a strategy behind this? I mean, maybe from your perspective, from a former IDF or from an Israeli perspective, you see it as different. But a lot of people in the Middle East, Arab world, some countries in Europe, like in Spain, do see this logic. And I wanted to kind of bring that forth. And I'm sorry I took so much of your time, Adar, by the way.
No, all good.
And if I'm let me know. It's the first time I'm in.
Yeah. I mean, again, war unifies people for sure. Not only Israelis, it unifies nations. This is well established. Does Netanyahu have benefit for continuously being at war? I think he's trying to preserve his legacy after the disaster of October 7th. He wants to remain. He wants to restore his legacy. Netanyahu has really been like a supporter of the status quo. He's never been someone who try to fundamentally change things. He's kind of kicked the can down the road, keep the people safe. That's how he's operated until October 7th. October 7th, it all blew up in his face, and now he needs to get as many wins as possible. So now he's really trying to restructure the region, defeat Iran, defeat Hezbollah, defeat Hamas, for sure. But none of this like is connected to the map of Greater Israel and trying to establish that and hold all that land. It's not the right way to think about it. And then Comrade Singh Adar's logic. I just want to read a comment.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me be part of the stage, and thank you for all the people in the comment section. Some people showed me love, so I appreciate that. Thank you for inviting me.
Glad you hopped on. Thank you.
Much appreciated.
So Comrade wrote, Adar's logic would imply Nazis never had ambitions of global domination because they I don't think the Nazis were trying to conquer the entire world. Is that what people claim? I don't even think that's true, bro. So it's probably quite similar. All you need to do is speak to Israelis, listen to Israeli politicians. Israelis are one of the most radical populations in the world right now. And they're one of the most out of touch with reality populations in the world right now, meaning they have zero theory of mind of others, zero understanding of why people don't like them. They can't come up with any possible theory why Israel is disliked aside from anti-Semitism. And they're so out of touch with reality. It's not like they don't know how so much of what they say is just cringe and off-putting. So listen to Israelis. They're going to say some of the most unhinged things ever. No innocence in Gaza. All the land is ours. We need to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. All the death in Gaza, that's Hamas's fault. There's no shortage of this being said. Find me the Israelis talking about Greater Israel. They don't even know of this theory. Most politicians don't even know of it. It's just the thing that's spread, you know? But hey, that's the world we're living on. For an idea to spread, it doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be compelling. So important to keep that in mind. Anyways, we're going to wrap this up on the stream. I have to take another call now, but we will, whoever I didn't have time to bring on today, we'll just need to do it at a different time, but you guys can continue in a voice channel, the conversation. So thanks for tuning in. This was fun. Until next time, friends. Sending love.